So our third pick for our Halloween special for the Skyline view is The Evil Within. It's a horror game, of course. It has to be horror. It's from the creator of Resident Evil 4, Shinji Mikami, and it's also being published by Bethesda Studios. The game is great. I mean, it's really enjoyable, but it's still kind of bad in its own ways. But this is essentially what horror games were like when you played games back then, like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Fatal Frame. Like, they were bad games if you played them as a game. But if you play them as an experience, as a horror experience, a survival horror kind of thing, it's a really fun game to play. And that's exactly what The Evil Within is. It's bringing back that old school feeling of horror, and it nails it right in the coffin. So the game is bad in its own way. I mean, the graphics are poor, but it still looks great. I mean, the game looks nice and all, but the textures don't load fast enough, which is very shocking to me, especially on the PlayStation 4. It's a powerful machine, but it can't load the textures fast enough. That, and the textures don't load in a cutscene. This is the most shocking part about it. A cutscene is supposed to be a pre-rendered scene. You have a loading screen to get to it, and the game still doesn't load it for you, the textures. So there was a moment in the very first cutscene where it would cut from the car that they were riding to like the outside city to a wall, and you could see the textures just loading layer by layer. It was so annoying to see it, especially in this generation of gaming. But the game, the graphics, I know they're supposed to look nice, but if it takes that long for the graphics to look nice, you might as well stay with bad graphics. This game is not a game that should focus too hard on graphics, because it focuses on the scare factor, the gore, and the horror of the game. In The Evil Within, you play as Sebastian Castellanos, a detective who was sent to an asylum that reported a murder, a shooting, or some sort of, murder. Or by the time you get there, it's a massacre. And your job is to figure out the mystery. But after a while, the game just gets really weird. It turns out that the game is playing with your head, literally with Sebastian Castellanos' head, like everything's going on in his head. And I guess that explains the title, The Evil Within. But it's such a weird experience. But that's great. For survival horror, weird is good. And that's why I really like The Evil Within. That's where it shines, at being weird. The game is a survival horror third-person game. I wouldn't really call it a shooter, even though shooting elements come often in the game. It doesn't focus on the shooting because it is a survival horror game, and there are stealth elements to it, and there's other forms of combat. It doesn't focus on the shooting because ammo is scarce and weapons aren't always readily available. Some items you'll never have for the rest. You'll have only a few amount of times during the game. Sometimes you'll have it throughout the game, but you won't have any ammo for it or ammunition. And that is what makes this game a survival game. The whole notion that you won't always have the items you need. Then we get to the sound design of the game. The sound is great. Every footstep, every moan of the enemies, every gunshot, every hit of an enemy or a weapon, the sound comes out perfectly. In this game, the sound is really much needed to keep the atmosphere alive, because I already said earlier that the graphics are kind of mediocre at best. So the sound is really what redeems the game, because it really keeps you playing, and it keeps you scared because it heightens your sense of fear, and that really helps the game become a horror game. So the gameplay is really where the game falls apart, but in a survival horror game, that is actually acceptable, because games back then, like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Haunting Ground, Clock Tower, Fatal Frame, all those games had poor gameplay and controls. But because they were survival horror games and they gave you genuine fear, they were actually really great games, and you didn't mind the controls. That's the case with Evil Within. The gameplay and controls are really weird and they're hard to get used to, but because the game is so terrifying and you really want to keep up with it, you stay playing the game. As I said, the controls are poor. There's a really weird layout with the controller. Like the X button is the use button. That's kind of a given. Circle button is to use a match, and that's pretty much it. That's all there is to it. And then triangle is your melee button. Square is a reload button. But this is where it gets weird. You hold down R1 to sneak. You hold down L1 to sprint. And then your trigger buttons are like a shooter controllers. So it's left trigger to raise your weapon, right trigger to shoot it, or throw a weapon, or if you have a melee weapon equipped, R2 is like a substitute for triangle, so they do the exact same thing. And then the inventory is brought up by the right stick. You click the right stick to open up your inventory. I've never played a game where the inventory is brought up by a click prompt. A control stick button, and then the left stick is to turn on your lantern. To click the left stick is to turn on your lantern, which is only useful for the darkness. Other than that, there's not really any much use of the lantern, and it doesn't even deplete. So you could keep it on the whole game, but since it kind of is a stealth game, you might as well keep it off. And then the directional buttons are like quick slots. So you could assign something from your inventory and then assign it to your D-pad. So up, left, down, left, right. There will be inventory items if you assign them from the inventory. So the combat is not really justified in the game, like especially the gunplay. I mean, Sebastian Castellanos is a detective, and if I remember correctly, detectives have some accuracy they have to hit before they can pass the test to become a detective. But in the game, sure, I mean, he's scared of what's going on, but still, a detective is a detective. Their shooting skills should be really up there, but Sebastian Castellanos' shooting really isn't. Like, it's hard to aim with him. He has a handgun and a shotgun. The shotgun is easy to aim because, I mean, it can shoot anywhere. It's like a spread. But the handgun is really hard to shoot with. It's almost useless. But if you get the right headshot, you can kill an enemy in one shot. And then there are some aspects that are melee weapons, a hatchet or a bottle, but the bottle is not really much of a melee weapon, it's more of a distraction kind of thing. And the hatchet, for some odd reason, breaks in one use. I know they're trying to make the game like really scary, how weapons aren't reliable, but it's, to an extent, it's really just not understandable how weapons are this bad in the game. And then the melee attack is a punch, but then you could sneak in the game and perform stealth kills with a knife. He's gonna pull out a knife from his vest and use it to take down the enemy. But for some stupid reason, his melee punch is just a punch without a knife. It would have been so much easier if he could just pull out his knife and use it. Stab the enemy or something. But no, he punches them. It's weird. I know he's not a Leon S. Kennedy from Resident Evil 4 who's like a super soldier or a secret agent or a secret service, but still, he has a knife. Use it. And then the story, it fits in for a horror game, but if you're really in it to pay attention to the story, this is not the game for you because it doesn't make any sense. It's all in his head, and that's the whole point. Everything is in his head. So it starts to just unravel that he's going crazy. But I haven't beat the game yet, so I wouldn't know. I actually don't know the ending yet. So I can't really say that he is going crazy. But from the looks of the game, or how the game is turning out so far, that is essentially what is going on. Like, the story starts out slow and then it just gradually gets weird. And if you are into old school horror games like Silent Hill and Resident Evil, this is the kind of game for you. It's really great how it's reminiscent of the roots of horror. So why is it a great pick for Halloween? I personally was so excited for this game because it was going to play like every other game that came out back then, like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, because it is Shinji Mikami, and he did say that he wanted the game to take that kind of direction. And I was looking for a game like that for the longest time, and here it is, and I love it. It's a really weird game. It's a bad game in its own way, but it is really, really fun to play. It is so scary. It is a great game to play at night in the dark or on Halloween night, and put your headset on or turn up the volume or something and just immerse yourself in the game, and you are gonna get scared. So despite the graphics, the weird combat and gameplay, as long as you're being scared, this game is doing its job. And that exactly is what is going on when I play the game. And this is why I chose this as the third pick for the month of October, a Halloween special, The Evil Within. This was Miguel Garcia, signing out.